Welcome to this Innovation Forum webinar, where we'll be discussing how we will power the digital age and ensure grid stability through the energy transition. I'm Ian Welsh, and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. The rapid expansion of data centers and AI is reshaping electricity demand at an unprecedented pace, creating new pressures on grids, planning frameworks, and decarbonisation efforts. As digital infrastructure becomes more central to economic growth and innovation, energy systems must evolve to remain stable, flexible, and sustainable. So there's a lot to talk about. And we've an expert panel to help frame the discussion. We have Sophie Graham, who's Chief Sustainability Officer at IFS, AI-powered software provider. We have Stephen Carlini, Chief Advocate AI and Data Center at Schneider Electric, energy tech company. And Iris Balduter, Chief Executive Officer at Snurpa Power, Power Optimization Solutions Specialists. So welcome to you all. My thanks to Innovation Forum's Lola Hart for bringing our panel together today. I will turn to our panel shortly, but we want to hear from you as well. Please be thinking about points and questions that you'd like me to put to our experts and write them in the Q&A box on your Zoom window. Please note your name and organisation when putting your question. You can, of course, like others' questions by clicking the thumbs up, and the more likes, the greater the chances that I will put the question to the panel. We are recording the webinar, and I will share the recordings with everyone in due course. Okay, let's go. Sophie, welcome. Perhaps you can start us off by setting the scene a bit around how AI and data centers are reshaping energy demand and decarbonisation. So how in particular are you seeing AI change energy demand across the industrial sectors that you work in?
Thanks, Ian. And maybe to give a bit of context, IFS plays in asset-intensive sectors, so manufacturing, energy, utilities, and service-intensive industries. And what we're seeing is that AI is changing energy demand in two different ways at the same time. Firstly, it's clearly driving up electricity demand, particularly through data centers, through AI training and inference workloads, and the electrification of industry that AI is also helping to optimize and automate. So the demand that we're seeing growing is actually concentrated, it's often inflexible, it's creating real challenges for grids that were not designed for that kind of load profile. In some regions, AI-driven demand is already influencing grid planning, connection queues, and investment decisions. On the other hand, we're also seeing that AI is unlocking significant hidden capacity in existing systems. We'll talk a lot about the grid today, but this is also true with the kind of assets that our large manufacturing customers are using. So AI can come in to help companies do more with less, deliver more with the infrastructure we already have. In a world where, from a grid perspective, permitting is slow, expansion is slow, build out is slow, wider perspective, energy costs are rising. This do more with less ability that comes with AI is really important. So the net impact that we're seeing is not just AI is increasing energy demand, but it's really reshaping when, where, how we consume energy, and how responsibly it's deployed.
It's a really interesting issue, isn't it? AI is part of the problem, part of the solution. So can you talk us through a bit more about how that conundrum is solved?
Yeah, absolutely. I think of it as two sides of the coin, right? So if we talk about, energy, the energy and water that's needed to power AI systems, particularly during training, it's very intensive. And so this places growing pressure on electricity, water, and critical minerals. While AI is stimulating that spike in the energy grid, we're seeing increasingly hyperscalers are actually investing in on-site nuclear, small modular nuclear, or renewable energy. So they're actually investing in enablers of the energy transition and decentralized energy systems. So we're seeing that as a trend to cope with these unprecedented high AI workloads. And it's also a question of speed, right? So how quickly can they be connected? Microsoft, for example, we work a lot with Microsoft. They've promised to keep buying enough renewable energy to match all of their electricity needs. They've now met their 100% electricity through renewable energy promise. So that was announced in the last couple of days. And so it's really ramping up from these tech giants, their capital expenditure on renewable energy to fuel that AI expansion and AI boom. We're also starting to see regulation supporting this, such as in Ireland. So that's really an interesting one to keep an eye out on. But the solution side, to look at the other end of the coin, where we're seeing AI being really one of the fastest ways that we have to accelerate progress on carbon goals, particularly in hard to abate and heavy industry. So if we look at energy systems in particular, the IEA estimates that existing AI applications can already unlock 175 gigawatts of extra transmission capacity if they're widely adopted by the electricity industry, alongside cost savings of over $100 billion. So how is it doing that? There's a significant mismatch currently between the rapid expansion of renewables, twice as much investment last year went into renewables as in traditional fossil fuel energy, and the infrastructure upgrades that are needed to bring that renewable electricity onto the grid. AI can help by providing greater real-time visibility onto the grid loads, forecasting loads, anticipating and planning surges, managing bottlenecks, and tapping into existing capacity. So it can help to optimize grid performance. We have one customer, for example, in IFS that uses dynamic line rating for AI-driven congestion and forecasting. And with that, they can actually unlock 20 to 30% more capacity on the existing lines. So again, doing more with what we already have. We've also seen AI being used with vast quantities of GIS data. That's its strength, right? It can use this vast quantities of data and make sense of that to predict with much greater accuracy things like wildfires, so the external pressures, which can then be not just a huge cost to business, but also contribute a lot to carbon. So I guess, AI has these two sides of a coin. It's something where there's no automatic sustainability benefit. This is about the governance, the incentives, the policy and regulatory framework, but also every individual business thinking about how AI can be deployed to help accelerate progress towards their decarbonisation and sustainability goals.
Do you think there's a link between big tech businesses that you mentioned, Microsoft, in it kind of feels like they should be using AI and they should be using renewable energy. I mean, it would feel wrong for these big tech businesses, the businesses of the future, to be investing in, coal-fired power, for example. Are you seeing that?
I think, yeah, there's definitely, a big push from hyperscalers and from the tech giants to invest in renewables. So the Ireland example I mentioned, Microsoft is pressing ahead with data center build out in Ireland, and in Ireland, data centers account for 22% of their power consumption. So what Ireland has done is come out with a new policy mandate that means data centers that are being built need to meet at least 80% of their annual demand from additional renewable power, which means then that the data centers builders and the Microsofts of the world need to then be investing in new renewable energy and connecting that. So essentially tethering data center growth to domestic clean power investment. And Ireland's being widely seen as kind of a test case by other places like the US, like Netherlands, where we see these constrained grids plus a big aggressive data center build out. So that's a really interesting one to watch.
Do you have any other examples of how AI is helping organizations optimize energy use and reducing carbon footprints?
Yeah, I'll give you one of my favorite ones, and it's applicable to any company that has a lot of workers in the field, really, which we work with telecoms companies, with big service providers that might have tens of thousands of engineers and technicians in the field. And we have a AI-driven planning and scheduling optimization engine, which essentially uses agentic AI to optimize field engineers' routing at any time and dynamically update that. And when we looked across customers, we found that reduced travel distance by 37% on average, which then you look at the power of just that optimization, it really shows how we can do more with what we already have. Maybe the other example I'd quickly mention, because I think, there's the low-hanging fruit that we can pick in efficiency gains, and then there's the long-term planning piece. And we have part of the business called IFS Copperleaf, which uses AI decision analytics to help in investment planning. So this is 10, 15, 20-year time horizon planning over your assets. If you're a national grid, for example, one of the customers, how and where do you upgrade those assets that take into account net zero goals, that take into account climate scenarios, changing of weather and severe weather. So AI can help to really do that modeling but also then bring that into a consolidated investment case that can combine, you know, that can compare hundreds of thousands of potential investments and say, this is the right one that allows you to meet those goals around resilience, around cost, without compromising on the energy transition goals that you also have.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Sophie. Thank you for setting the scene. Lots to come back on there, but thank you very much for now. Stephen, welcome. I can see you got the blue shirt memo, so thank you very much for that. Um, Perhaps you can talk a bit more about some of the infrastructure and data center issues. So, how are you seeing AI moving from pilot projects into large-scale industrial deployment?
Yeah, let's just start by saying it's, not a horrible time to be in the data center business. And Schneider, you know, is the largest power and cooling supplier for solutions for AI factors. We also, as you mentioned, we're an energy technology company. We also have a business that deals with the grid operators or utilities and helping them optimize and deliver power to the customers. So, we're involved with this on, many different levels, but AI is definitely interesting. We say it's still in the beginning, but even though it's in the beginning, there's been a massive investment in AI training models. There's no question about that. So now it's time to get these models working. So the way a lot of companies are approaching it are they're piloting the applications that they would like to see. And when I say piloting, they're actually some companies are actually doing thousands of pilots of different applications they want to see. And then they're evaluating the results of those pilots. So a lot of the infrastructure that was built for AI training is also being used to pilot what we call AI inference or reasoning models or workload models. So actually function where you query the model and get a response, either generative or decision making in industrial AI, things like that. So there's lots of capacity that's being deployed and it's being used to pilot a lot of these inference models that companies would like to deploy. And they want to deploy them because they want to have a competitive advantage. And in some cases, they want to cut their operating costs. They want to use AI to improve the processes of their workflows, of their systems. They also want to use AI to optimize things like supply chains. So we're seeing early adopters in industrial AI, in manufacturing with supply chain, workflow, scheduling, manufacturing automation, also in energy. We're seeing AI being deployed on the supply side of energy with advanced distribution management systems, and also on the demand side with data center operations, employing things like battery energy storage. So the data centers are becoming more and more of a grid participant or a power system that has to be managed. We're also seeing things like medical, diagnostics, drug discovery, personalized treatment. So if you would have asked me, a year or two ago, what is going to be the rollout of AI working models? What's it going to look like? I would have said that the industry was going to be pragmatic and do small sites, make sure that things are working before we go all in. But what the industries seem to want and the companies seem to want, they want to go full automation, full agentic. So they're trying to like bypass, the initial steps of testing to make sure things meet all the requirements and get the maximum benefit all at once. So it's going to take a time. Like I said, it's still at the beginning, and we're seeing dramatic increases in the performance of the hardware, the GPUs, the accelerators, the TPUs, and also the DPUs, the data processing units. So things are evolving and getting more efficient with every generation.
So, really exciting, interesting to hear how you are seeing this acceleration. But isn't there a risk of putting all the eggs in the AI basket? I mean, what are the potential unintended consequences of this slightly less pragmatic, perhaps, to your word, approach that you're seeing?
Yeah. it's there are risks, and we're starting to see companies that actually try to streamline their workforces and depend, entirely on AI when it may not have been completely ready. So we have to have AI go through a process where it matures and starts adding value, and with little or no human intervention. What we're seeing is a lot of the AI models that are being deployed still need, even though they're saying they're agentic in some cases, we're still seeing a lot of human intervention and validation of the outputs. So it's definitely the goal as the models mature to have them operate more autonomously. And an example is could be like X-ray diagnostics. You're seeing a lot of AI being used to actually read that and give the diagnosis. But all of those diagnoses, even if they're 95%, there's still 5% that are wrong. So there's has to be oversight on those until it gets to the point where they're 100% accurate.
But where was a human X-ray reader get 100% accuracy?
Is it, say that again?
Well, you say AI only provides 95% accuracy? Well, I was arguing, would a human doing the same job, whether it's an X-ray reader or other, would a human provide 100% accuracy?
Well, the human will have in a lot of cases more experience, with different factors the AI may not have been trained on. As there's more and more data that's processed through, and the more the AI can learn, the more accurate it can be. But you're still seeing, situations. I'm not saying humans are 100% accurate, but they are able to catch some of the mistakes the AI could be making.
Sure. Okay, let's think a bit more about the changes you're seeing then. This shift that you've been talking about, what's that meaning for data center design, power requirements, and interaction with the grid? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, definitely on the power side. I think, Sophie mentioned the amount of power that data centers are consuming. When I talk about the AI advancements in GPUs, we may see a 10 times increase in the performance of tokens per watt. But we're also seeing an increase in the core wattage that the GPUs take. So every generation seems to be doubling the amount of power that it consumes. So we're going from a situation today where we're at the Blackwell Ultras, which are, around 150 kilowatts. We're going to go to Rubin, which is going to be around 300 kilowatts. These are the NVIDIA processors. So every generation, every year, they seem to double. So the power and cooling architecture needs to evolve to be able to support that. And it becomes, it wasn't, 10 years ago that we were at 10 to 12 kilowatts per rack. Now, this year, at the end of the year, we're going to be going up to, 200 to 300 kilowatts per rack. So a tremendous increase. So the power and the cooling systems, obviously, we're going almost exclusively to liquid cooling. And and when I say we're going to liquid cooling, so we're going to liquid cooling of the processors, the GPUs. So in a data center, it's still a hybrid where there's things like networking equipment and other things that still are going to require air cooling. So 80% of the heat that's being generated in these AI factories can be liquid cooled, but is still going to need 20% of air cooling. And the power systems need to evolve as well. So we're coming to the physical limits of 400 volts AC power into these AI superpods, or the NVL72s from NVIDIA. So we're going to have to migrate to what we're calling 800 volt DC distribution. So that gives us a lot more power for less copper. We're going to have half the copper, so we'll be able to connect these. And we'll also be able to put more equipment into a single rack. So 800 volts, you can DC, you can go up to more than 1 megawatt per rack, where the physical limitations of 400 volts is around 400 kilowatts per rack. So the whole architecture of how we deliver the power from the utility, to the GPUs is going to be changing at the end of the year, beginning of next year.
Okay, in terms of operators, what trends are you seeing how operators are managing rising energy demand and performance needs?
Yeah, this is a question we could spend, all day on. But some of the things we're seeing is the data center operators are starting to use their backup systems, their emergency generators, and as strategic assets. We're also seeing them deploy battery energy storage systems, 2 hours and 4 hours, also as strategic assets. So it's not a technical problem. We could use the generators and those battery energy storage systems to either charge when there's sustainable carbon-free power available, or discharge whenever there's a shortage or there's grid stress. But a lot of the data centers have service level agreements, or they have some constraints with how many hours they can operate on diesel generators. So the industry is transforming. They're starting to power the diesel generators with either green or eco-friendly, lower emission types of fuel like HVO, which technically has zero tailpipe emissions. So these are going to give the data center operators more flexibility to run on generators for longer periods of time without having any negative emissions on the environment. And also by deploying these battery systems. And when you're deploying, 100, megawatt data center, and you're deploying a 4-hour battery for that, that's not just a little room full of batteries. Those are huge facilities full of batteries. And what you can do, in addition to grid stabilization, you can also use that to, whenever there's excess of renewable generation, which sometimes there is, because during the day the sun's shining, the wind is blowing, there could be excess that the utility is actually curtailing and actually charging the batteries during those times, and actually discharging them, when it's the most beneficial, either back into the grid or do you have the data center operator use those. So it's becoming the grid is becoming more interactive with the data center. The data center is becoming more of a grid participant going forward.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks very much indeed. Really interesting, and loads more again we can come back on. Audience, to be thinking of your questions. I think we have our first question already, and I'll be coming to that shortly. But please do be thinking of your questions, points, interactions you'd like to me to put to our panel, and put them into the Q&A box. And keep them short. More likely I will use them. But please do be thinking about your questions and put them into the Q&A box. Iris, lovely to meet you. Thanks very much for your patience. Let's talk a bit more about grid and system perspectives then. How are you seeing AI-driven data center loads affecting grid stability and the planning? Just moving on from the points that Stephen was raising there.
Yeah, exactly. It's certainly an interesting time to be working in this field, and I've been watching how power-intensive industries and different sectors have been evolving, and it's been really interesting to see how quickly the data center loads are growing. And with more AI loads, I am seeing more and more frequently that AI loads are framed, I think, unfairly as a new demand problem, you can say. So from a system perspective, I would say it's more of a coordination problem. And I really agree also with what Stephen had to say here earlier, that the technology is there. Coordination, we haven't quite gotten there yet. So AI-driven data center demand is different from traditional industrial loads that historically are stable base loads, but what they have in common is that they're all requiring high reliability, high availability. They differ in several ways. It's the scale of the loads and the growth, the speed and the concentration. So what we're seeing now is 100 to 500 megawatt increments coming online in very short timeframes. And the speed of building these facilities is around 12, 18, 24 months, while for grid reinforcements, you need to take 5+ years. So that obviously creates a dilemma in grid planning and connecting these new loads. And thirdly, they're concentrated in specific geographies, and demands are clustering around digital hubs. So this is creating a lot of demands on the grid and new challenges. But the issue isn't really just higher energy consumption. It's about synchronization. It's about the high density load that can stress local networks and increase congestion, and increase the imbalances if they are not properly forecasted. So the challenge isn't maybe only the AI demand itself, it's really about unmanaged AI demand. So if the loads behave like passive base loads, they create a strain. But if they are forecastable, if you can forecast the AI load ahead, and if they can provide flexibility, then they can become a system asset and they can increase grid utilization. So it's very much about coordination between the grids and these loads, large load clusters.
So then, moving on from that, then, what role do energy management, forecasting, and flexibility services, as you just mentioned, play in managing these new demand profiles? How does it all fit together?
Yeah, exactly. So with Snärpa Power, we are providing an energy management and execution platform tailored for power intensive industries. And we're working with the data centers and metallurgy companies, so several sectors. And we're seeing how the loads of data centers are evolving and becoming more, well, I wouldn't say volatile, but they're changing faster. They have a faster speed of ramp rate up and down. Overall, demand has to evolve from being passive to active. So historically, the power system has been built out based on active generators, so active generation that follows demand. This is not really the solution for the future. With more and more renewables coming online, we also need active loads. So we need active users and generators on both sides of the system. And therefore, energy management and forecasting of loads and generation becomes very central to this topic. So first you have to attack how predictable is the load that is connected to the grid or the generation. And we can now expect wind farms to forecast production within a few percentage points. So I think we should just expect similar intelligence from a 200 megawatt data center. And AI workloads are not all equally time critical either. So here we come to the coordination factor again. So you have cooling systems, storage layers, redundancy buffers, UPS systems. There was some mentioning of the generators as well, local generators. Certain compute tasks offer flexibility layers that can be activated or shifted within certain time frames. And this all has to be activated intelligently so that you can synchronize that with the grid without hurting, of course, the quality of the data center services. So here the key is really visibility and coordination. And with the markets now having moved from a 60-minute time unit to a 15-minute time unit, and even 5 minutes in some cases, you can do high resolution forecasting and have much higher predictability of the loads. And then combining that with automation, optimization, large electricity consumers can actively participate in balancing markets and congestion management. And I think a lot has been done on the market side and on the grid side, but there are also tools and solutions needed for the industrial consumers or for the loads, and in this case, for the AI loads. So in our work with power intensive industries, we've seen imbalances reduced by up to 90% for individual industrial loads and data center loads in particular. And then on top of that, if you are providing balancing to the grid, you don't only become an inactive stabilizer, but you actively help stabilizing the grid. So the future grid cannot remain generation following. It also needs loads that respond intelligently to system conditions.
Fascinating. Thank you very much indeed. Audience, do we think of questions? Karen will be turning to you shortly. But I wonder, can you share any examples from current projects you're working on, or any insights from those projects that demonstrate those new approaches that you've been talking about?
Yeah, exactly. I can mention a few examples, but one of them that I find most interesting is really where we are collaborating with multiple stakeholders in Norway through a project called the MaxGrid project. And this is a pilot project where we are collaborating with Statnett, the Norwegian TSO, with Sintef Energy as a research partner, and then several distribution network operators across Norway and energy-intensive industrial consumers. And it's all about combining several digital solutions for the grid and for the consumer side to increase grid efficiency and grid utilization by 25%. So then suddenly digital tools become the kind of the new infrastructure of the future grid, because we can actually exchange new high voltage infrastructure partly with digital intelligent solutions. So there, of course, AI comes into play as a tool to enhance the intelligence of the grid. So we've come kind of full circle. And so here we're focused on the grid utilization. Snerpa Power is working together with two other technology providers who are providing a dynamic line rating and probabilistic risk assessment of the grid. So combining these three digital tools to enhance grid operation and allow more loads to be connected to the existing grid infrastructure.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Again, lots to come back on there. Well, we will turn to our audience. We have a question, and the questioner suggests that it is all very well to require companies to supply 80% of energy consumption requirement, but does this also include investing in grids? Our questioner Carolina says it is very well established. Carolina says that renewable energies destabilize energy grids. So let's take those 2 points in turn. Iris, let's turn to you. I mean, grids is what you were talking about just now. Do you think would you like to see companies requiring to invest more in grids? And secondly, do you agree that renewable energies destabilize energy grids?
Yeah, I think first of all, on the grid topic, I think grids are essential to fully utilize all assets connected to the grid. So I believe in distributed generation and being able to produce power where it's most economical, but then you need to be able to transmit it or distribute it to other locations as well. And also for reliability and resilience reasons, you need grids to support different regions. And when you have certain disturbances or some unique conditions, because they will occur on the grid. So yes, we will need grids to provide an efficient and economical renewable electricity to consumers. Do I believe that renewable energy resources are destabilizing the grid? Not necessarily, because we do have, of course, like hydropower, which is really efficient when combined with wind or solar power, because it has this storage element as well. And then with battery systems being able to store renewable energy for usage later on, we have so many new technologies that can be layered on top of each other and used for multiple purposes. So I would like to see more of a multi-purpose thinking. So when, for example, industries look at an asset, look at investing in a new asset, they should look at how can this asset serve me and my core business, but how can it also serve the grid? And then, of course, you need the markets to be there in order to profit from it. So you have to create all these markets and frameworks so that every asset can serve multiple purposes.
Okay, thank you. Sophie, do you want to come in on the same question then? Do you think there's a need for for grid users to be required to invest more in infrastructure? And what about the instability or the destabilization of grids from renewable energies point? Sophie.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think we are we're seeing a very pragmatic drive to from the big hyperscalers. The top five in particular would be really investing in data center build-outs, but also their influence is extending to grid planning and infrastructure where they're building data centers. So we're seeing that as a notable trend. And if you look at the deep pockets that these tech giants have, they are a tool for us to accelerate the energy transition, renewable energy integration, small modular nuclear, more flexible, pragmatic ways of working. There's a notable trend towards hybrid models. So the data center, not just on one form of electricity of energy or another, but hybrid and having an emphasis to on battery storage as well. So there's a huge amount of investment going in to renewable energy generation, to things like small modular nuclear, things like battery technologies as well. So it's not just about the influence on the existing grid, but it's about how can they scale up other forms of energy as AI is seen as a strategic move for countries nationally as well.
Okay, thank you. Stephen, same question to you then. What about requirements for greater grid infrastructure investment from everybody, from users, particularly as it becomes more dynamic and enables the asset use that Iris discussed there? And then, do you see renewable energies destabilizing energy grids, or how can that be countered if that is the case?
Yeah, again, this could be a whole webinar on its own. But there is something that Iris mentioned, which is the rapid ramp up and ramp down that's inherent in some of these data centers. And first of all, we wouldn't be talking about this if data centers weren't gigascale campuses. You see Meta with a 5 gigawatt data center plan. So the inertia problem, with the ramping up and down is an issue. And the older fossil fuel based and nuclear have higher inertia. And the renewables, wind and solar have much less inertia, so they need to be stabilized. There are ways to do that with batteries or supercaps in the data center. So what people forget is the data centers, no data center is running on a single electric feed. They're all running on two primary, at least sometimes three. And you're starting to see, massive investments being announced, on different types of nuclear investments from the data center industry. We're also seeing a move to, more natural gas and turbines being deployed in data centers. But again, the destabilization, I think, can be managed, with technology and with a combination of the different types, of power. So you are going to start to see, more nuclear coming online. You're definitely going to still see the trend of wind and solar to continue, but the data center operators are kind of working, very, very closely, with the grid operators. They're also working, when we say grid, we're talking electric grid. There's also this emerging, natural gas grid that's coming up, which is a different grid that isn't as highly regulated as the electrical grid. So deploying things like natural gas turbines and fuel cells, is something that they're pursuing as well. But there's less regulation and inherently less reliability for going down that road. So that's why the data center operators are having, to balance the types of prime power with the types of backup power, which is also increasing, as I talked about earlier.
Thank you. And our conversation has sparked some questions, so thanks very much indeed. As often, as always, well, it seems to be the case a lot of the time. A lot of this challenges here come down to who's going to pay for the infrastructure that enables all this exciting grid use and development of all assets, as everyone has been discussing. So, who should be carrying the cost and risk of grid upgrades then, driven by large digital loads? Should it be on developers, utilities, taxpayers? Who should it be paying? Sophie, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's always the question, isn't it? Who will pay? We'll need new infrastructure, we need upgrades to the grid. Who's going to pay? And I think what's interesting and the opportunity is that, yes, the rapid expansion of data centers driven by AI is stimulating a spike in energy demand, but there's also a lot of capital put against it now. So there are deep pockets from the tech giants who are building these out. And they have a real incentive just from a business standpoint. This is bringing their business online. This is a question of how fast can they connect those AI workloads for their business. So I think, there is a good opportunity to accelerate the investment in things like grid infrastructure, renewable energy, by working together with local government, regional government, and the big tech players who are building out these data centers and have those deeper pockets to make investments.
Thank you. Stephen, your perspective then, who do you think, or how does this right structure in terms of the cost of all of this? Where should they be lying?
Yeah, there is no shortage of capital because of the free cash flow of some of these companies, but also the investment capital is tremendous right now. There's no shortage of investment capital, but data center operators understand that they're going to have to pay, and Microsoft has already came out and said that they are going to pay for any kind of incremental uh, uh, power delivery for their data centers. The last thing that they want to do is drive up the price for the residents. The residents that should not have to pay for any kind, not just the power for the data center, but also any increases caused by the data center. So you're starting to see the data center operators come together and unify around this, that they're going to come into certain, areas. Everywhere they go, they're going to make it very clear that they're not going to put the burden on the local residents to be able to have to pay for the data center power. So as Sophie mentioned, they do have the money to pay for it, and they are willing. We are in the middle of this AI race, and by far that's more important than who's going to pay for the utility increases or the power to build them.
Thanks, Stephen. And Iris, what about you? What's your thinking around how does the best, or where should the burden fall?
I guess in the end, the user always pays, and that's of course what drives us forward in finding new solutions. And we all know that the cheapest megawatt is the one you don't have to build for. And if there is a possibility to squeeze more out of the current system and current assets, we should all work towards doing that. And I think the International Energy Agency actually said it so well a couple of years ago, explaining that the biggest energy source for the future is energy efficiency. And it's about utilizing energy more intelligently. So it has such an incredibly large impact, and we're lucky to have a system today where we can make these large improvements still. Of course, we will need to build out, and the consumers will be paying for that, and then it better be fair. because we know that residentials shouldn't be paying for infrastructure that is needed for the industry. So that the costs, of course, have to fall towards the right stakeholders.
And regulation must have a role here. And this comes us on to our next question from the audience. How can regulation drive this in the right direction? Not just in terms of who pays, but in terms of the responsibilities and efficiencies. What's the sort of regulation that can work well here? Iris, do you want to pick that up first?
Yeah, exactly. And I think regulation is a lot about the risk. I mean, you don't build a high voltage infrastructure for a couple of years. You build it for, 70 years ahead. And an industry, we see how the data center industry has been evolving in a very short amount of time. Is it an industry that will stay? If you build up an industrial area, you have to think really long term and really strategically when you make these decisions, and you have to be very clear on who is taking the risk here if anything doesn't go according to plan in 10, 15, 20 years. And that's and those are large questions.
Indeed they are. Sophie, from your perspective, what regulatory changes or developments would you like to see?
Yeah, so the European Commission is coming out this year with a data center energy efficiency package as well, which looks at, as part of that, carbon neutral push as well for data centers. But we need that broader perspective of what is this going to do to the user. To give an example from the US, in Memphis, there are about 60% of the population there that's on assistance from the government to pay their energy bills because they've really spiked, and we've seen a data center build out. So we need regulation to be able to look across those different stakeholders and see, okay, how do we plan this so it doesn't spike the user's energy bills? And it focuses, on flexibility, on integration of renewables, but importantly on doing more with what we already have.
Thank you. And Stephen, what was your thinking around the right regulatory innovations that can really help here?
I think more and more you're seeing it in the UK and in the US. Data centers are being classified as critical infrastructure. And with critical infrastructure, more regulation is coming. There was a, again, 2 years ago, if you had asked me this question, when I was speaking about sustainability and how are the data center operators going to be able to report in a very accurate way not only their carbon emissions and their energy use, but also their water use. And things have really slowed down with the regulatory environment, from my opinion, what I'm seeing. And with this race to AI, it's kind of been backburnered a little bit. It's still very, very important in parts of Europe. But I think the data center operators are operating as responsibly as they can. I mean, we have meetings every day with data center operators that want to have closed loop liquid cooling systems because they do not want to use any liquids or waters in their data centers. So these are the discussions that we're having. We're having the discussions on making everything more efficient. How do we optimize the electricity that we have, which Iris has been talking about the entire time. So from a demand side, how do we make that as efficient as possible? And how do we design the systems from a power and cooling perspective? There's things that are coming, like different kind of breakers and transformers that'll use electronics, instead of heating up. So things are definitely going down the pathway of becoming more and more efficient, as we go forward to put less stress, but then using that electricity in the most efficient way is also very important.
And I guess when you have these data centers being such significant users of power, and the recognition when you are a massive user of power, that in fact it is the renewable energy sources that are the most efficient and best use, the cheapest forms of power, if you can get the infrastructure right, that's going to be driving the energy transition in itself. Because you've got these big energy users who recognize that, we need to be using renewables because that's way more efficient here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's definitely a path. The data center industry is way ahead of other industries in their investment in clean power. The amount of renewable energy credits and power purchase agreements and virtual power purchase agreements from the data center industry dwarfs every other industry. So they're in fact, funding a lot of the renewable production that's going on in the world today.
Okay, interesting question. Next, someone's commenting on a New York Times story that they read, talking about how data centers, again, because they're massive users of energy, massive users of power, are can make there's a potential income stream for them to be disconnecting from power grids when at a time of massive need. So the example here is a snowstorm. There've been a number of those in the northeastern United States in the past few weeks. Is that something going forward you think might be interesting? Is that the next stage in the dynamism of the grid? The kind of these data centers. I mean, it comes to your point, Iris, about there needing to be a kind of a dynamic relationship between these big power users as and when they use the power from the grid. They take it out when the grid needs them to take it out, but they don't take it out when the grid needs it to go somewhere else. Iris, does that chime in with you?
Yeah, I really believe in hybrid models, and I think the key to a more efficient system is hybrid models and not isolated like energy islands. But if a load point on the system can be a hybrid point where you both have generation, you have loads, you have some controllability and flexibility, then you reach an optimum. And then you can get support and you can get power from the grid when you need to and to a certain capacity point. And then you can also support back when the grid needs your support or market signals are pointing in that direction. So I think disconnecting from the power grid is not going to give, this is my personal opinion, the most economic solution for anybody. But to be completely dependent on full grid connection is not necessarily either the best solution. So I'm very much for hybrid models, and I'm very much looking into different hybrid models these days, and who benefits from them, and how can you encourage large loads to look at those models seriously. And I think also going a little bit back to your regulatory question, that we should build out a regulatory framework that encourages more flexibility and the ability to be a hybrid load on the grid.
Thank you. I think the questioner was suggesting that being able to disconnect when necessary or when to allow the power elsewhere.
Okay, I see.
It is that hybrid model that you were alluding to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I understood it as like a microgrid sort of thought, but yes, there is also again technology. The technology is there. There is so much that can be done with fast controls, wide area controls, but we also need the markets and the regulations to follow, and contractual environments as well.
Okay. Sophie, do you have any comment on that? The ability of these data centers to be flexible and when they can take the power, so that there is that snowstorm scenario that the questioner suggested.
Yeah, and again, we can see AI coming in to help identify when to run different loads as well. And for example, during times when there's more availability of renewable electricity. But I think it comes back to the social license to operate as well, which kind of touches on, we talked about who's going to pay for it, what's the regulation that's needed, and there's a bit of a regulatory vacuum. But the announcements from the likes of Microsoft around, community first infrastructure build, energy, water replenishment, that's really being driven by two things. One is that social license to operate, so the communities in which they operate in, but also, there is a commercial opportunity by lowering energy and water costs. They have a business benefit, right? It costs them less to run and then essentially isn't passed on. So there's this social license to operate, but also the commercial opportunity. And I think it's a really interesting idea. I haven't read that New York Times article, but I will go and look it up after this.
Stephen, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it goes back to the comment I just made on critical facilities. You don't know what happens when the data centers go offline, what the effect is going to be. And that's why a lot of the data centers are starting to be, classified as critical facilities. We are involved with a project called DC Flex. It's being put together by EPRI, and it's all of the major data center operators and all of the major grid operators in the U.S., Europe, and the global data center operators and some of the large colos. And DC Flex means data center flexibility. So it's all about how do we make the data center operators more flexible, because the technology's there. They could go on, emergency generators if they can. They can migrate the workloads to other data centers in those situations. But there's certain conditions and regulations that are kind of in the SLAs that are prohibiting them to do this. So there's a couple of parts to this program. And the first part is going to be more on rules and agreements and how we can make data centers more friendly. And then on the technical side of it, how do we have the data centers and the utilities communicate in a kind of a standard protocol? So the output of this is supposed to be a blueprint, a technical blueprint of the interface between the utilities and the data center operators. So you could look it up. It's called DC Flex from EPRI, EPRI.
Great, no, thank you. We're coming towards the end of our time. It's flown past as it always does. But I've got a great question I wanted to put to our panel to round things off. Our questioner asks, if you had $10 to put on the future winner of the AI race, taking into account research and development, but also access to cheap energy, so the energy transition conversation, who would it be? Would it be USA? Would it be China? Someone else? Norway, maybe? Who knows? Somewhere in Europe? Stephen, who's going to win this race? What you spend your $10 wisely?
I would definitely bet on the U.S. I think the U.S. I think Europe's a little behind, and they're scrambling to catch up. But I think the U.S. is putting everything in place to win this race.
Okay, Sophie.
I think China's one to watch. If you look at, they are really a power in the energy transition and an established dominance. So they control about 80% of the world's supply of solar panels and PV, and have built, international relationships where they've been the provider of energy to countries like Pakistan, based on these solar panels. So I think they've been investing so heavily and so rapidly in bringing down the cost of technologies like PV cells. And that really positions them well, along with their supply of things like critical minerals. So I think China's one to watch.
Thank you. Iris.
Yeah, that's definitely a fun.
For Europe, please.
That's for sure a fun question. Yes, I'm going to take another aspect on this one. I think for the AI race, I hope that we will see even more competition, and that we will have, Europe entering even more heavily. I think that would be the best for the AI development, that we see a healthy competition between US, China, and Europe, and maybe some more continents.
Well, we just had a question asking where we're racing to at a minute to the end of the webinar. I'm afraid we'll have to leave that one for next time. But it's a great question, and thanks very much, Trevin, for your questions. I'm going to draw the discussion to a close there, as we are running out of time. Many thanks to the panel. It's been a really fascinating hour, and thank you to you all for your questions as well. We will, of course, continue the conversations at the first Energy Transition Innovation Forum, for Amsterdam on the 15th and 16th of April. Full details, including how to secure best price conference passes, are on the New Look Innovation Forum website. As a webinar listener exclusive, we're currently offering a limited number of 50% discounted passes. please get in touch with lola.hart@innovationforum.co.uk. The link was in the chat if you're interested in those. We'll be in touch with the webinar recordings so you can share them or listen again. But for now, I hope you have found the past hour useful. I've been Ian Welsh. Thank you for joining us, and goodbye.